I thought when I finally got to New York, I said, I'm going to have fun here. I'm going to enjoy it.
Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses, and each week I talk with Olympians, pro athletes, TV stars, Grammy winners, best-selling authors, CEOs, and other high performers to uncover their success secrets. Every conversation is jam-packed with inspiration and actionable ideas we all can apply to our own lives, personally and professionally. Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the techniques, processes, and mindsets powering the world's most successful people. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a new season of Everybody Pulls the Tarp. This week, my guest is former Major League Baseball manager Terry Collins. Over the course of his career, Terry has served as manager of 3 MLB teams. First as the manager of the Houston Astros, then the Anaheim Angels, and eventually as the manager for my beloved New York Mets. Terry is also the host of his own podcast, The Terry Collins Show. Now, I have been a Mets fan literally since the day I was born. And as a lifelong Mets fan, I have experienced many of the highs and lows that often come with rooting for your favorite sports team. Unfortunately, though, the last time the Mets won a World Series title was in 1986, and I have absolutely zero memory of it. At the time, I was just a year old and fast asleep in my crib as the Mets beat the Boston Red Sox to clinch just their second World Series title in franchise history. And ever since, I've been anxiously waiting to see the Mets win another World Series and finally get to attend that Mets World Series parade that my parents promised they'd take me to back when I was a kid. Well, it's been a long wait, 38 years to be exact. But even without a World Series title in nearly 4 decades, the Mets still have given me some great memories. Like in 2015, when then Mets manager Terry Collins led the Mets on a remarkable run to the World Series, where the team fought valiantly but ultimately came up short against the Kansas City Royals. And during his tenure as Mets manager, Terry also presided over so many other great Mets moments as well, like Johan Santana's no-hitter on June 1st, 2012, the first no-hitter in Mets history. Now, Terry is without question my favorite Mets manager that I've gotten to watch during my lifetime. And there are many, many reasons for that. One reason is obviously the part he played in delivering some of the memorable moments I just mentioned. But the real reason why I have always admired Terry is his leadership. As a fan, I watched Terry day in and day out bring passion and intensity to his job, while also showing an unbreakable loyalty to his players. Every night at his post-game press conferences, win or lose, Terry was honest, authentic, and showed everyone how much he cared. In the conversation you are about to hear, we explored Terry's career and many of the mindsets, ideas, and philosophies that have powered his success. I am so grateful that Terry and I got to have this conversation because it's filled with timeless wisdom that applies far beyond baseball. I'll be thinking about my conversation with Terry for a long time to come, and I hope you take away as much from this one as I have. Oh, and one more thing. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Terry Collins. Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, Terry.
Well, it's an honor to be on your show. I've heard a lot about it, and I'm anxious to sit here and have a conversation with you today.
Terry, where I want to begin, I always like to go way back. What would you say is your first memory around baseball?
Well, my father was a very good athlete. He actually moved from Toledo, Ohio to Midland, Michigan to play fast pitch softball for Dow Chemical, who would back in the 40s was looking for something for the people of the town to do. And so he came up. And so when I was a little boy, we played catch all the time. And I got into baseball. And I'm not a very big guy, and baseball was always the sport that us little guys could excel at, and we didn't have to be big and strong.
So when was the first time that you realized that you albeit a small guy, you were pretty good at it relative to a lot of the people around you, and that you understood the game a little better than the average person around you.
Well, yeah, when I was really young, I was a pretty good player, and I remember in my hometown we had these little like neighborhood baseball teams, and so one day, and I think I was in the fourth grade, maybe, and so I was at school, and there was a knock at the door, and it was one of the sixth graders who was the captain of the safety patrol, and he asked the teacher if he could talk to me, and she said yeah. So I went over and he goes, "Hey, we're going to play so-and-so's team tonight, and we want you to come and play with us." And I was I'm 2 years younger than these guys. So I think that was when my first realization that maybe I was okay at doing what I was doing. So, and then from that time on, I just started playing as much as I could possibly play.
So you went on to, you played 10 years in the minor leagues, never played in the big leagues, but you went on to have such a storied career in player development and coaching, and then obviously at the big league level as a manager. Was that something that you thought about early on, that, hey, if I don't end up playing in the big leagues, at some point the next phase of this journey is going to be helping others achieve their dreams and get on that player development side?
I go back to when my first spring after I had signed, I signed in June, and I played half a season in the New York Penn League. And in my first spring training, I saw guys that were playing in Double-A that were 28 years old. And I wrote a letter to my mother and said, I'm going to play in the minor leagues and for 3 years. And if I don't get to the big leagues, I'm going to go back to school and use my education. I always wanted to be a coach anyway. So 3 years later, or 50 years later, I'm still in the game. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with what it meant, what it stood for. I love the camaraderie of my teammates. I love the competition side of it. And there was a stage I probably spent back when I was in AAA. There was no free agency, no minor league free agency. And I was with the Los Angeles Dodgers back then, and they had the same infield for 12 years. So I saw good infielders, Ivan DeJesus, Bobby Randall, Jerry Royster. There was no room in Los Angeles for those guys. So hopefully you maybe get traded to a team that could use you, or you hope for expansion. And so there was a time when I was in AAA where I said, you know what, I got to use this experience, this time here in this organization at this level, to learn as much about the game as I can. And so, I was blessed in spring training with the Dodgers. I mean, you'd go in the back room. We had in Dodger Town, you had a little back room that was like a little bar where you could sit and you'd sit there and listen to Sandy Koufax. You'd listen to Roy Campanella. You'd listen to Maury Wills. I mean, all the great Dodgers were back there, and you just sat there and listened about what they were teaching and the way they went about the game. And that education, you could not pay enough to get the education that I had coming through the minor leagues with the Dodgers.
I feel like this is an idea that applies not just in baseball or sports, but to everything we do in life. That, like, curiosity is one of the most underrated life skills. Like, when you tell that story, I just think of somebody who was curious, who was intellectually curious, who wanted to absorb and learn as much as possible. Where do you think that curiosity in Terry Collins comes from, broadly? Maybe not even just as pertains to baseball.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be the best I could be no matter what I did. I played a lot of sports. I had basketball scholarships. I'm 5'7". I had a couple of basketball scholarships. I had 2 or 3 football scholarships. And so I loved to compete. I was one of those guys who, when I took the field, I played as hard as I could. I never had to ever worry about a manager or a coach saying, hey, you got to play harder. I tell a story when I was, people would ask me about my childhood. And I remember my mother telling me one day that one of my friend's mothers called and said they didn't want their son playing with me anymore on the playground. And my mom said, why? And they said, well, he plays too hard. And so my father that night came home, and my mother said, you've got to talk to Terry. And my dad said, about what? He said, well, so-and-so's mom called today, and she doesn't want her son playing with Terry. He plays too hard. You need to talk to him. My dad said, yeah, I'll talk to him. My mom said, what are you going to tell him? He said, I'm not going to tell him not to play with so-and-so. Because, don't change the way you go about things. Just don't play with that kid anymore. And so that's who I was. And I look back, and even when I was managing in the big leagues, some guys, I was a real intense guy. I had to be. In order to compete at the level that I was at physically, I had to play hard. I had to play harder than anybody else on the field. And that's what kept me in the game. And my passion for that is probably what helped me be the manager I was.
everybody's got a different personality. Everybody needs coaching maybe a different way, even if the values and the principles never change. How do you navigate that? Like when you think about all these different personalities and you have this intense personality, which is obviously reared itself very, very early in your life. How do you manage that? How do you identify how you're going to connect with different people? Because you certainly did that during your time with the Mets. I mean, I got to watch it firsthand every single day.
Yeah, I told my players, I explained to them, and every year, in your first speech, I tell them, listen, you know what? I believe that every night I get ready to manage a game. And when things don't go good, sometimes I take it personally that I didn't get them ready. If we had a bad game or something, I realized how hard the game was. I'm not mad at them because I know it's hard. I know we're going to make errors. We're going to strike out. We're going to hang a slider. I get all that. But if we didn't play very well or there were some mental, mistakes during a game, I took that was my fault. And sometimes the players, because of that, I was a pretty intense guy. And some of them would come in and they'd say, are you mad at me? I'd say, no, I'm mad at me, because I didn't think I got you ready. And so when I got the job here in New York, I said, I'm going to enjoy it more. I'm going to enjoy the job more and back off the intenseness and just get my players ready, have some fun with them. Hopefully we've trained them well and get them ready for each and every night, but enjoy the job because there's only 30 of them and they aren't going to last forever. And I think that's one of the things that really helped me here in New York.
Only 30 of them, and they're certainly not going to last forever. I remember when the Mets named you manager in 2011, I was particularly struck with and optimistic because of what you had done the year before. You were the minor league field coordinator, in 2010 with the Mets. And I just felt like, given where the Mets were at that point, they had a lot of young talent in the farm system. Having somebody who knew the organization, but who knew the organization kind of from the bottoms up would be a really interesting and positive development for the franchise. And it obviously proved to be that way. How helpful was that from your vantage point of having that year as the minor league field coordinator and knowing the organization a bit heading into the top job in 2011?
Well, I had managed in Houston. I had managed in Anaheim. And I got a job one year to be the minor league director, run the minor leagues for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I took all of the things that I had that I learned as a player and all the things I learned as a major league manager and got a better feeling for what it took to be a big league player. And so I would go take my minor league players and we would say, hey, look, that's not going to play in the big leagues. You've got to you got to approach things differently. You've got to be able to have a 2-strike approach in the big leagues. Different things that when I was with the Dodgers, we had a team in Los Angeles one year. We had 7 of the 22 or 24 guys on the team. 17 of them played in the big leagues. I mean, we're talking the Matt Kemps and the Kershaws and Billingsleys and Russell Martin. And I think I hired a lot of guys to be minor league coaches who had major league playing experience. And I think that made a big difference. And so when I came to the Mets as the field coordinator, that's the way we approached it. We're going to try to make major league players. And there are things that you've got to be able to do in the minor leagues because when you get to the big leagues, you can't make mistakes, and you're a young player. And so I wanted to make sure when those guys got up here, they were major league ready. They covered first. They backed up bases. They hit cutoff men. They moved runners along, passed the baton to the next hitter. And so I think all those things helped. And so when I got the job the next year, the big league players knew me. They knew what I did in the minor leagues. They knew how we ran the minor leagues. And so it was a little easier for me to come in after being in the organization for a year than I had it at the other places.
When you're thinking about like player development like that, and what you outlined there was a lot of little things that add up to make all the impact, right? I mean, all these, hitting the cutoff man, covering first. How do you instill that attention to detail in people? And again, your answer here is it could apply to baseball, could apply to sports, could apply to pretty much anything we do in life. People listening want to know, how do I get better at the little things? Get that attention to detail that you're describing there.
Well, like I said, I thought I did a really good job of hiring good people, good coaches. And now I'm holding those guys accountable. We set down a plan of how we're going to do things, and now it has to get done. I remember one year I had a pitcher who, and this is when these guys were 19, 18 years old, and they were throwing 95, 96 miles an hour. And I went in one time and I saw a game where these guys pitched, and they came in the game and they were throwing a lot of sliders and change ups. And I said to them, first of all, you got to command your fastball to pitch in the big leagues. You've got to be able to command. At 96 works. First thing we're going to do, we're going to learn how to throw strikes with our fastballs. Then the other stuff's going to work. We'll work on the sliders. But if you spend so much time on something you're not really good at yet, you're never going to do the one thing you are good at, and that's throwing hard. And so, same with hitters. A lot of times we take hitters, and I see it today because the game has changed about power. Power comes. Good players, they'll learn how to get the ball up in the air. But the key is to make solid contact. Use the field to hit. Learn the strike zone. Swing at strikes. Don't chase. And those were the things that I thought, and we did it with the Dodgers and we did it with the Mets, that I thought made our players better and more prepared. And I look at any of the businesses in the world today that no matter where you go, and that is accountability. Hey, look, you got to be held accountable for what, when you take the field or you walk in the office every day, as long as your effort's there and there's some thought behind it and some work ethic, if it doesn't work, hey, we'll go at it again tomorrow. And that's the thing. Sometimes I talk to businesses and I say, the one thing about baseball players, we fail 70% of the time. And yet we have to learn how to pick ourselves up and tomorrow have a better day. And I always think, gosh, if I'm in business and maybe I'm in sales and someone says no to me, I can't take it personally. I got to get ready and figure out what I need to go do tomorrow to have that, or have somebody say yes. And I just think that's, as we learn every day, as we're on the field or we're in life, you just try to be better and try to figure out what's going to make a difference. My father told me when I was a young guy, make a difference every day when you get up. What can I do today to make a difference? And I think that as a baseball player or any walk of life, if you have that philosophy, things will get better.
Make a difference. I mean, that's such a cornerstone of living the everybody pulls the tarp mindset, Terry. I think there's so much wisdom in what you shared there. I'm curious, as a leader, as a manager, how do you know for sure if the people around you are working hard or working hard enough to meet your expectations?
Well, there were always guys on your team you knew that just grounded every day. They grind it out every day. And so all of a sudden, the guys that are around them, you can tell when their effort is what you expect. And I used to go back to practice. We used to talk about you can't practice at game speed. You can't replicate game speed. It's impossible. But what you can do is do the best you can to try to understand how fast the game actually is. So we used to do drills, and you could tell guys that just, hey, look, it's a drill. I'm not going after the ball. And then, and again, I never want to embarrass a player. You don't want to ever embarrass big league players. So, you got to go out there and say, hey, look, we got to have some better effort. And I know it's in there. And challenge them a little bit. And that, to me, is one of the things that managers have to do. And then sometimes, and as we saw, Andrew, this year, where in spring training, Mets had a player who didn't run a ball out. And one of the leaders on the team addressed the issue. Not only addressed it to him, addressed it publicly. And that's where the impact can be made. And so, as the guy, and I had a player years ago who said to me, I didn't run a ball out and I took him out of the game. And, I knew he was upset with me and stuff. So the next day I said, you got a problem with what happened yesterday? He said, I've been thinking about it. And I have this thought. He said, I don't ever want to look back in 15 years and say, God, I wish I would have played harder. So no, you're right. And it won't happen again. And I said, you know what? The easiest thing is to tell me. The hardest thing is to show me. So just go show me. And I never saw it again. And that, to me, is when you're managing, there are certain things you got to address. And again, there's times when years ago, they more than they do today, where, you didn't run a ball out, or you went after a ball lackadaisically in the outfield, or you didn't back up a base as a pitcher. You came out. I mean, right. that you set an example. Hey, this is how we're going to play the game here. I saw Bobby Cox do it in Atlanta. I can't tell you how many times. I saw a pitcher one time not cover first base. And before he got back to the mound, the manager was on his way to the mound, and they didn't have anybody warmed up.
He didn't care.
So, yeah, he came out. An example was made. And by the way, the other 10 guys in that pitching staff, they said, well, that's never going to happen to me. And I think those are the things today where the importance of the leadership in your clubhouse, that stuff's being addressed. And you see the good teams, they have that. And I thought last year, that's what I saw out of the Mets. And that's why I think what Francisco Lindor did last year, Nimmo, they played the game right, man. You look at what Lindor went through early in the season, and yet he never stopped playing. He never stopped, didn't get down on himself, making a lot of money. He never got too low because he wasn't going good. And when he was going great, he never got too high because he understands how hard the game is.
That's a common through line through so many of the conversations that I've had with the world's top performers in any discipline. And something that I've seen in my own life. I'm constantly reminding myself and others that we're generally not as great as we are at our best. We're not as bad as we are on our worst day. We're always kind of somewhere in the middle. And frankly, a lot of your success comes down to like, how do you navigate those really bad times? And how do you get the most out of yourself when you're in that average window? I think there's a lot of that in what you said there.
Yeah. Andrew, and the one thing about baseball, obviously, when you have a bad night, everybody in the country sees it because it's on ESPN. You're on the worst 10 list or whatever they have. And, you're a little embarrassed, but you know what? It happens. And it's happened to the greatest players of all time. I mean, I talked to Sandy Koufax. It was one of my good friends. And he talks about the time that he lost a game because he gave up a home run to Eddie Matthews because he didn't want to pitch to Hank Aaron. And so, but he said, I got beat, but Hank Aaron wasn't going to beat me. And so even though he was upset about giving up the home run, I mean, they just understand it's all part of the game. And I think that's where in sports, we have to understand that. And there's going to be nights that you're just not, it's just not there. I used to tell the writers always at the end of the game, and you've probably heard me, the team on the other side of the field, they're big leaguers too. They get uniforms with their names on the backs and they're being paid to beat you. And then once in a while, they win. And it's no disrespect to your team, but that's just the way the game is. The idea is to forget about yesterday and maybe take something that happened yesterday and say, okay, I learned from this and make it better today. Because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So today is the only game you have to worry about. And fortunately in baseball, we don't have to wait a week. I always used to feel bad about pitchers, starting pitchers who have a bad night. They got to wait 5 days to get back out there. And I'm telling you, some of them are miserable to be around for 4 days. But the whole point is you got to prepare. And I always think in business, the same thing. If you go in and you have a bad sale, well, figure out why. And when they walk in the next next place, sell it, make a sale. And so for me, there's that common denominator of what it takes to be successful. And I think it's about confidence in yourself, knowing who you are, knowing what you are, and not asking more than that. Just be as good as you can possibly be.
So just to pull on that a little bit more, I mean, so fair to say, if you've got a guy that's struggling, in your view is philosophically, you'd want to get him out there again as quickly as possible to try and work through it.
Absolutely.
How would you identify as a manager, though, when it's kind of gone too far, when that individual just needs a breather, they need to step back a little bit? Like, how did you find that right mix?
Well, there's a lot of things. First of all, there's a lot of conversations going on between you and this particular person, the manager and this particular person. And you can kind of get the feel that, hey, look, he needs to take a step back here right now, take a blow. You know what? He's been battling. And all it's done, he's digging himself into a bigger hole. And you got to convince him. I used to tell our guys, no matter who you are, maybe you're 0 for 10 or 1 for 21. You're still the top 1% of the 1% who plays this game. You're still major league players. And so, have some confidence and realize you're talented. Now let's go back to a lot of times the basic stuff of what you did to get here. I used to call up guys, Andrew, from the minor leagues, and I'd sit them down and I'd say, what got you to the big leagues will keep you in the big leagues. The minute you think you've got to do more and be better is when I'm going to be calling you in and sending you back. And so do what you do right, do what you do best, and maximize it. And I know we always, and this is for me, one of the toughest things about coaching, we always want every player to be a star. We want every player to be the total all-around package. That's hard to do. Just the greatest of the greatest are like that. But what you want to do is keep what they do right and they do well and maximize it, because that's what's going to give them success. And I see a lot where, and especially in today's game, where they want everybody to throw 100. Not everybody can throw 100. So you know what? Be really good at what you do. Don't make mistakes trying to overthrow by throwing balls in the middle, down thigh high in the middle of the strike zone. If you live on the outside corner and you're 91, it's not 99, make pitches. And I still think that's successful today. And when it comes to hitting, it's the same thing. Hey, look, be a guy that puts good swings on the ball because, and you and I have talked about this, when you hit a ball, things can happen. Guys make mistakes. You group a single in here. I go back, I tell the story all the time how we won a big game against the Yankees in the Subway Series. David Wright got a jam shot single off Mariano Rivera to right field to win the game. He didn't care he hit it off his fist. You know, the point is, it was a hit. And I think, again, staying with your strengths can make you as good a player as you can possibly be.
So you talked there about your strengths. You also talked about something important. I think that one of the most important pieces of leadership is this idea of having conversations with people and staying engaged. Let's go to one of my favorite Terry Collins moments. June of 2012, Johan is pitching a no-hitter. It's the 7th or 8th inning, and you have to have a conversation. And he tells you that, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. Now, every Met fan, many baseball fans are watching you. The camera keeps going to you. Obviously, for those who are not familiar, Johan Santana is amidst pitching a no-hitter in the 7th or 8th inning at this point. He's coming back from surgery. He's got a pitch count. There's all kinds of concerns about, he's late in his career. What could this do to his arm? And the TV camera just keeps going to you. What is Terry Collins going to do? And I have to admit, I was a Mets fan out sitting on the edge of my seat, Terry, like a lot of us, hoping that he was going to get it done, wondering what you were going to do. I never in a million years thought you were going to take him out. Thankfully, you didn't. He completed some Mets history. But we often find ourselves in difficult situations where we've got to process a lot of information. How were you in that moment processing what you were going to do? Because decision-making in high-intensity situations is something that we all deal with. Not when somebody's trying to pitch a historic no-hitter, but it's a situation that we all find ourselves in. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, Andrew, that's one of the great questions. Great. I mean, during that time, my stomach was upset. It was churning. I knew the importance of Johan to the club, but basically it came down to him. You're talking about one of the elite pitchers in the game who you have to trust. And as a manager, if I show that I don't believe in him and don't have trust in him, I may lose the whole team because they're going to say, well, okay, he's being told what to do. These are not his decisions. The organization has said, okay, here's the parameters of which you're going to run your game tonight and stay within them. And unfortunately, I never had that. But during those conversations with Johan, and I think, Andrew, to be honest, I believe it was the bottom of the set. And when he came out in the 7th inning, I went down and said, how you doing? And he said, I'm fine. Trust me. It's going to be okay. And I said, that's when I told him, I said, well, you're my hero. And I turned around and walked away. And yeah. And I've told him, by the way, in the next 2 innings, I'm saying, somebody please get a hit. Because I did not want this guy to run that pitch count up there to where it was going to affect his next several starts. But I thought he earned it. I thought he had earned the right to try to attempt this, to make history. And he did. And have a great relationship with Johan today, even though he knows it tore me up inside. But I also went to a banquet one night where a guy came up to me, similar to what you went through, and said, I'm a fan. I took my father to the game, and he said, my father died last year. And before he died, he told me this greatest moment was that he got to see Johan Santana pitch that no-hitter. And that took away all of the ill feelings I ever had after that game was over.
Yeah, it's easy for people to look from afar and say they do this or they do that, or it's just a game, or it's just a statistic or a piece of history. But this stuff means things to people. It means things to the organization. I think that point you made there about what it would represent to the rest of the guys in the clubhouse, not whether he achieved the no-hitter or not, but what message it would send to the rest of the guys in the clubhouse if you were just kind of following some script and didn't have the trust in what your player had said. That's really, really powerful.
Well, that's the way I thought. I really thought about that. This guy's a mega star, and he just said, look, I'm going to be okay. And I said, okay, go finish it. And he did. And so I took a beating afterwards. I couldn't eat a lot of myself. I knew that I probably overdid it, but I go look back today, and he and I talked about the whole thing. And He doesn't regret it one bit.
I read a story somewhere, a year or two later, he came back to you, he goes, Terry, I was not coming out of that game.
He told me that about 4 months ago, and I saw him. He said, "You do know I wasn't coming out, right?"
Yeah.
Said, yeah.
It turned out pretty well. Let's talk about another megastar. A year later or so, David Wright, the team names him the captain, which is, for those listening who are not as familiar with baseball, I mean, that's a rare thing in baseball. There are very few team captains. It's not like hockey where there's always somebody who has a C on their sweater. I read at the time a story, and you can confirm if this is true or false, that once the organization had kind of made the decision to potentially do this, you made David walk around the clubhouse and essentially ask the teammates if they were supportive of this. Is that generally accurate in terms of how it all played out?
Not really. It started that I felt when I first got to the Mets, Andrew, I formed a group. I'm a pretty intense guy. So I formed a group of veterans, like 5 guys, and they drew up all the rules. Okay. When to be at the park, curfew, dress codes. So that, because as a manager, especially in New York, where you have so much attention away from the players, I mean, there's so many things you've got to do media wise, community relations wise. A lot of times, as much as you want to try to be with the guys, you have other responsibilities. So I formed this group. And so I saw the impact. I used to see the impact David used to make when he would get to the ballpark. He's a funny guy. He loved to joke at the others, his teammates. But when he walked through those doors of that clubhouse, people looked up. I used to be in there. He'd walk in and people, they'd be tying their shoes and oh, David's here. And so I went to him in spring training in that year and said, look, I'm thinking about asking Fred and Jeff and Sandy if I can I'd like to name you to be the captain. And he said, Terry, I don't want that. So I said, well, I want you to think about it. And he said, why do you want me to be the captain? I said, David, it's not because I want you to give speeches, motivational speeches. It's because of the way you play the game, your respect for the sport, your respect for your teammates, the fans, the media. I want people to see that. I want people to follow what you're doing. And so that's when he came to me a couple of days later. He said, listen, I've been thinking about this. And he said, I want to talk to the guys. So David's the one who approached it to me. He said, I want to talk to the players. And if there's one guy who doesn't think I should be the captain, I don't want the job. I said, that's fine. And he talked to 25 guys and he got 25 yeses. And that's how it all came. And then Fred and Jeff and Sandy both said, if that's what you want to do, then fine. And so that's how he became the captain. And I couldn't have made a better pick.
One of the things I've always been curious, Terry, obviously from that point forward, David had a lot of injury issues. He was away from the team a lot, spent a lot of time in Port St. Lucie rehabbing. How hard is it for you as a manager and for the team in general when such a key guy, not just from the statistics that he would contribute, but just from all of those intangibles that you described there, how hard is it to navigate when somebody like him is just coming and going, just away from the team and then back with the team, then away from him? Is that particularly challenging?
Yeah, it is. It can be, Andrew. But, one of the things obviously that helps in today's world is the social media side. So David, even though he was in Port St. Lucie rehabbing some injuries, he was still texting guys. Hey, I saw the game last night. Nice play. Or, hey, look, hey, relax a little bit. You're pressing, you're overdoing. And so he still had some impact on some guys. But I also had the Curtis Grandersons of the world. And in 2015, when David got hurt, we went out and got Michael Kadire, who was one of the ultimate best leaders I've ever been around. You add him, you add Curtis Granderson, you add Bartolo Colon, who the Latin contingent in your clubhouse all looked up to Bartolo. So you had those guys, and they were good people. I mean, you're talking about guys who make a big impact as anybody. And so when David wasn't there, these guys just knew it was their time to take a part of it. And I remember when we got Jay Bruce, he was a huge part of that team in 2016 when we were making a run. And as Asdrubal Cabrera, guys who were veteran guys who had been on winning teams before, knew that they had to have that leadership in that clubhouse. So those days that David wasn't there, we fortunately went out and got some good leaders and brought them in.
All right, everyone. We'll get back to the conversation momentarily. But first, I want to tell you about my free weekly email newsletter, Tarp Pullers. Each week, I share an uplifting and inspirational tarp pulling story that is sure to brighten your day. And I also highlight some of the most powerful ideas I've learned on my journey talking to 200 and counting of the world's top performers. The newsletter is short, concise, and a reader recently told me this. She said it makes her day every time it hits her inbox. Go to everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter to sign up today. I've heard you mention that before about Michael Kadire. What specifically was it about him is it about him that makes him one of the most exceptional leaders that you've been around in your entire career?
Well, first of all, he and David are, they're from the same area and they're really good friends. So that helped a lot. But Michael came from an organization, the Minnesota Twins, who obviously are a low budget team. And so they prided themselves on how to play the game correctly. And I mean, we're talking not just hitting and pitching. We're running the bases, hitting cutoff men, backing up, all the little things you have to do to win games. And Michael came from that background where practice, and I heard Johan Santana talk about it one time, they practiced correctly. There were no just out there, hey, I'm out here for 2 hours. I've got to go through the motions because I'm getting tired. No, they practiced right. And Michael brought that philosophy to the Mets. And when David was out, Michael's the one who started that post-game stuff where we awarded the belt to make it fun, to make it, hey, I want that belt. And I thought what he did in that clubhouse was imperative because David wasn't there all the time. And when David came back, obviously it was an easy blend because they all knew he was the guy. And so, but Michael, I thought, again, Sandy went out and got, Juan Uribe was a tremendous guy. And Addison Reed, who was a great, Kelly Johnson. I mean, these guys all came, they all were on winners. And they brought an attitude about what it takes to win in that clubhouse. And a lot of our younger guys, and especially that young pitching staff, they bought into it.
Well, you're referencing some of the great moments of 2015 there. Obviously want to spend some time on 2015. But just to frame this up, I'm a lifelong Mets fan. Just to give you more context, I was born in 1985. So I have no recollection of the last time the Mets won the World Series in 1986. I was sleeping in a crib when the ball went through Buckner's legs. I was asleep when they closed it out in Game 7. And you'll appreciate this story. I grew up in New Jersey, a big New York Rangers fan as well. And they win the Stanley Cup in 1994. Obviously, it ends a 54-year drought for the Rangers. And they have this big parade. I had no idea what a ticker tape parade was. At that point, I guess I'm 8, 9 years old. And I come home from school. I turn on the highlights of the parade. And I have the biggest concern that any 9-year-old kid could have. And I go to my parents and I say, if the Mets win the World Series, I probably said when the Mets win the World Series because I was a confident kid. I said, how the heck am I going to get to the parade if I got to go to school? And my parents made me a promise in that moment. They said, when the Mets win the World Series, we're going to take you out of school and you're going to go to the parade. Well, I'm still waiting. We joke, my parents and I joke, I'm going to be taking them out of a nursing home if it doesn't happen soon.
Yeah.
But you got us closer to that parade than anybody has in recent memory. The other reason 2015 is special to me, it was the year my oldest daughter was born. So I became a parent. And so you probably know they do these, but you can get lineup cards, the real lineup card from the dugout, signed by the great Terry Collins right here. This is from the day that my oldest daughter was born. And I got to tell you, Terry, you look at this lineup, with no disrespect to these guys in mid-June in 2015, this lineup, nobody thought this was a team that was going to make it all the way to the Fall Classic. And it's a testament to, I always have said it, it's my favorite team that I've ever watched. And this past year was pretty darn close with the Mets. But 2015 was just really special to me because there were so many trials and tribulations. There were so many moments where things could have gone the wrong direction, but you held it together. The team far exceeded expectations. You alluded to it moments ago. The team added key pieces. I mean, obviously, you talked about Johnson and Uribe, but then Cespedes in the circumstances that he came. Let's start there. Like, how do you, in a moment like that, when you've got this influx of new blood, how do you make sure it doesn't disturb what you've got going and that it really contributes to the greater good? Because that, to me, is like, there's so many themes to 2015, but that has to be a big one, of that you took those guys in and they contributed right out of the gates.
Yeah, again, I'm going to go back. You get to know your players, okay? And as a manager, and this is just me, when I managed, I never worried about who I didn't have. I only concerned myself with the guys that were in that clubhouse. And I used to tell the coaches, coaches would say to me, hey, I think so-and-so is available on the Orioles. We got to go try to get him. And I said, that's not our job. Our job is to worry about getting the guys better that are in here. And so with that attitude, and all of a sudden when Sandy came and he said, hey, we got a chance to get this guy. I'm going to make the deal. We're going to bring in Juan Uribe. We're going to bring in Kelly Johnson, who we'd had the year before, or we were talking about it the year before. All of a sudden, the attitude in the clubhouse changed. Those guys now said, wow, they think we're good enough to compete here, even though at that particular time we were just doing okay. But it just changed. It just flipped the attitude of the guys in the clubhouse saying, hey, there's expectation. Our front office thinks we should be playing. We got a chance to win this. And with each guy that came in, that the attitude changed. It got better. And when we made the Cespedes deal and he walked in, you cannot believe the impact just his presence did with the rest of the guys in the clubhouse. And again, you raise your expectations. That's why I say it all the time. You create your own expectations in baseball. When you have a good team, you're expecting next year to be good again. Well, guess what? We got good players, and now we're adding other good players. And so now they're saying, wow, I'm expected to perform here. We got a lot of pieces. In order for me to play, I got to play well. And it just, again, the attitude completely switched from a team that was trying to compete to a team said, oh, no, we're in this. And I thought those additions, I've asked Sandy personally, I said, what happened during 2015 that you said, you know what, I think if we get a couple pieces here, this team's got a chance to compete. And I mean, I was flabbergasted by it. And obviously he went out and got the right mix of guys because they all blended, they all fit in. And I go back, Andrew, like you said last year, I watched that team last year, and I'm not sure I've ever been around a big league club that had more fun with each other than they did last year. And then I go back and look at 2015, and those guys loved to play with each other. They loved to be on the bench. That it was a time when you'd look down the bench and there wasn't two or three guys. There were everybody who wasn't playing was watching the game and into the game. And sometimes that's hard to find on big league clubs.
Well, we talked about some of the guys that came in. Let's talk about one of the guys that didn't end up getting traded, even though it appeared like it might be close. I'll tell you, and we'll set this up a little bit for people listening who aren't familiar with this story, but I have said for years that one of the greatest moments or series of moments that I've experienced as a baseball fan is the Wilmer Flores stuff that week. And for those listening who are not familiar, well, with Terry, I should probably have you tell the story, but the gist of it is rumors start spreading that Wilmer Flores, a longtime Met who's been in the organization for a while, has been traded in the middle of the game. Fans are like cheering him on, wishing them well. He's still in the game because Terry hasn't gotten any notification from the front office that they've traded Wilmer. Turns out he ends up not being traded, but he ends up at one point, the emotions start getting the best of him and he starts crying on the field. And you can see his eyes watering up. I mean, this is the only organization he's ever known. It's a big change. It's sudden. But he ends up not being traded. And a couple nights later, he hits a game-winning walk-off home run. And I just think that moment, Terry, like that was the moment where I said, okay, this team might go on a run here. How about a moment like that? You talked earlier about the idea of a few years before the signal you sent to the clubhouse when you trusted Santana. What about a moment like that with Wilmer? Does that stuff really galvanize people, or does the media and the fans and social media make more about that than it is?
Andrew, I'm going to tell you what, I totally agree. Because we were playing pretty good, but that home run sent us off. I mean, that was on I think on a Friday, and then Sunday we hit 4 homers against Zimmerman, and we ended up sweeping the Nationals and moving a tie for first. But that home run, at culminating what he had gone through and what the organization and the fan base had gone through 2 days before, was a movie script. You can't write it better than that. Now, here's a guy, and again, and what you said was true. I mean, Wilmer came up to the on-deck circle, and of course, I'm standing right there in the dugout, and I heard somebody yell at him, "Wilmer, good luck. Good luck. We'll miss you." And he turned and looked, and So, I mean, it wasn't 30 seconds later, David Wright walks up to me and he said, "Hey, it's all over the TV that Wilmer Flores has been traded." I said, "David, he has not been traded. It's all over TV that there's a deal done that he's traded." I said, "David, he has not been traded." He said, "Terry, I'm just telling you, they're announcing the trade." I said, "Well, David, that phone right there goes to Sandy Alderson. And if we traded this guy, that phone's going to ring and I got to take this guy out of the game." So now it's out there. Of course, everybody's got their cell phones. They're all reading about it online and in social media. And so now everybody's cheering for this guy. And he's a greatest kid, and so now he doesn't want to he's sad that he got traded, but he's still in the game. So he comes off the field and right next to the dugout. Andrew, I don't know if you've been in the dugout, but there's those steps that go down in a little area in the bottom. And so I took him down there. I said, "Hey, you get yourself together here. I need you to play shortstop right now." He said, "Well, have I been traded?" I said, "No, you have not been traded. If you've been traded, I'd have taken you out." So he comes out of the dugout and these people go crazy. They're chanting his name. So now he starts crying.
Right.
Matter of fact, one of the guys said, "Terry, he's crying." And I said, "Well, he's got to stop because he's got to play. He was my shortstop then." And so sure enough, the phone rings and it's Sandy. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got to get him out." I said, "Did we trade him?" He goes, "No, but he's crying on the field." Well, who the hell am I going to play shortstop? And so it came off, and obviously the trade wasn't made. And then, of course, the 200 homer just absolutely, I mean, everybody on the team at the time said, "This can't happen. This is crazy. This is karma at its best." And I think, as you just said, I think that set us off on that final run to the pennant.
I just remember him coming around and he's pointing at his chest. He's not pointing at me. He's pointing at Mets.
His heart,
and
yeah.
His heart.
Yeah. The Mets.
His heart. And to me, that was just a moment that you say to yourself, okay, like a lot of this stuff in life comes down to me and what's best for me. And how can I get that? How can I do that? How much money can I make? Am I in the best situation? But here you have and it was right around that trade deadline time. Here you have a situation where we're spending so much time talking about, like you said, who from outside the organization we're going to get. Here's a guy who so desperately wanted to be part of what he was already a part of. And I think it's just a neat example, and it transcends baseball. I think it's a lesson that, it's a story that I tell often to people who aren't baseball fans. You got to hear this Wilmer Flores story from 2015. Speaking of fans chanting names, when you get into the World Series, everybody's chanting Harvey. You've got another big decision to make, I guess not too far afield from the Santana one from a number of years before. I was of the school of thought that you did the absolute right thing. Is the same processing when you're thinking about, do I keep a pitcher in here? Do I not? Do I make a change? Is it very similar to what you were doing with Santana? Different from a standpoint that this is a much younger pitcher who doesn't have the track record that a Santana has. Talk to me about that. How is that similar or different in the 2015 World Series?
Were some very big similarities to the Santana situation, but it started earlier in the year where we had innings limits on those young pitchers. And there was a time, and I can't remember when it was, Andrew, if it was early June, middle of June, something, but where I said, my God, these guys are pitching so good. I've got to do something to shrink their innings. So I decided maybe I'll go to a 6-man rotation. So I had this meeting with all these guys and said, I think we're going to go to a 6-man. And Matt was one of the first guys to stand up and he said, "Terry, I want to pitch. I want to pitch." And kind of gets me out of my schedule, how my routines, and which you don't want to do. But I said, guys, the only way I can manage your innings is to give you an extra day here and there. So anyway, we didn't do it. We'd stayed in the 5-man. And then Matt had a situation where his agent came out and said, well, he's only going to pitch this amount of innings, which was less than what we had down. And so sure enough, we said, okay, that's what we'll do. So we had a game against the Yankees. Matt started the game in Citi Field, pitched great. I took him out of the game after the 5th inning because, again, the innings thing. And he came in my office the next day. He said, "I want the baseball. Just give me." He said, "I want to pitch. I'm not worried about the innings." He said, "Yesterday I wanted to finish that game." So here we are now. That fast forward to the World Series, and here's this young guy who said, "Give me the baseball," 2 months ago, and pitched brilliantly. for the rest of that season. And here's a chance, again, to show him that I trusted him. No matter how old he is, but he's going to be a star. This kid's going to be a star. He said, I was going to, I had Jerice Familia who'd say 50 games for us, ready to go. And even though Jerice had a bad first game, he was still our guy. And Matt said, this is my game. I want to go back out there. And I said, then by God, go back out there. So that's how that decision was made. And obviously, it didn't work out. But again, I think for all intents and purposes at the time, it was the right decision.
I agreed 100% at the time. And all these years later, I still agree with you. It was the right decision. There was no way he was coming out. There was nobody that was going to take him out of that situation. And these situations can go either way. And I think that's the mixture of art and science of when it comes to managing a ball club or leadership in general and just more broadly success. Terry, I am so grateful that we're getting to spend this time together talking through some of these moments and understanding kind of a little bit of the behind the scenes and how you process these as a leader and a manager. I'm curious, we're recording this in early April. It's early goings in the baseball season. Now you're kind of sitting at it, looking at it from a different vantage point. What is the hardest part of navigating the early part of a season?
Well, the hardest, again, you're talking about two different periods, Andrew. When I was managing, my starting pitchers were ready to go 100 pitches in the first game. So then that changed today. But the hardest thing is to make sure they're physically ready to start the season. And, to where, because this playing every day can wear you out. And, even in spring training, they don't play every day. So, they go out and, they play today, they're off tomorrow. So it's now about making sure that they're ready to go on 7 or 8 or 10 days in a row that they have to play before there's another day off. So, the conditioning side and really keeping an eye on them because it's cold. And as you go out and you're on the field and maybe you're a little warm and you come in and you sit in that dugout and you chill down again. Now you got to go back out. So it's the wear and tear early in the season is kind of tough because due to the weather. So, and again, some guys get off to slow starts. Some guys get off to great starts. But it's all about managing the fact that and don't ever let them understand, look, wins are important in April. Don't get me wrong. And they showed it last year. If you just keep the ship's going on the right path through this long trip through the season, it's going to get better. And so, no matter what they get off to out of the gate, what we got to look for when it gets hot in the middle of that summer, when teams start to fade because they're getting tired, we want to make sure we're peaking. So I always thought the championship teams, they were the teams that were the toughest to beat in July and August.
How do you make sure that with all the injuries, and it seems like the injuries are certainly more prevalent today for many, many reasons, which people are trying to better understand. There's just this constant flood of potentially negative news and adversity. I always admired how even-keeled you, despite all your intensity and passion and energy, which you clearly have for all this, those post-game press conferences, you were generally pretty even-keeled, win or lose, whether you had a big player go down with an injury or with some other setback with David Wright or whatever, as we talked about earlier. How do you stay even-keeled in those situations?
Well, the one thing you got to understand is, again, when you lose a player to injury, somebody's got to come in his place. And you don't want to make it like, well, season's over, because the guy who's going to replace him saying, he must not think much of me. If I'm going to be the guy that's the go-to guy now. And so, and again, you got to understand it's all part of the game. And yet you've still got to go out and play tomorrow. And your team has to understand it. You still believe in them. And no matter who they know they don't have David Wright, or they know that Cess is out, or that Santana's going to miss the start. They all understand that. But it's when they understand it's their job as a major league player to pick up the pieces sometimes. I used to watch when I was coaching in Pittsburgh, our bench players, the Lloyd McClendons and the Gary Reedises, those guys, I'm telling you, when they played, and by the way, when a lot of times when those bench players play, it's against a tough pitcher. Because that's when you really want to give somebody else, one of those stars, a night off when they're facing one of those toughest pitchers that they don't handle very good. And Lloyd McClendon used to tell Barry Bonds all the time, Barry, I'm facing the good pitchers tonight. But Jim Leland trusted those guys so much, and he made sure that they had, there was every week that they'd get four at-bats in one game. So, and I think that was the way to do it, to make sure everybody, and you wanted the writers and and the fan base to understand, hey, look, it's all part of the game. We don't like it, but it's all part of the game. And we just have to continue to move forward and stay the course that we set when we left spring training. And that's, don't show panic. Don't show over exuberance if you win 3 in a row. Just, hey, look, today, now this game's over. Okay, we got to see what we have for tomorrow and get ready to play again tomorrow.
I'm curious, Terry, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, reflecting on all this 50 or so years in baseball, as you said, you had just planned to spend maybe 3 years in the minor leagues and then go do something else. It's turned into something so beautiful that you've built here in your life and career. What's something that you worried about a lot early on that, reflecting now, you wish you hadn't spent so much time worried about?
Well, my whole thing was I love to win. Okay, I love to win. And so I always felt I only played the game to win. I kind of knew what kind of a player I was, and it was all about making sure that we did things on the field to win games. And I think when I started managing, I took that I went overboard on that to where, and I told you this in our first conversation, there were times when we didn't play well. I thought it was my fault that I didn't get them ready. I didn't get them prepared enough. And so I took a lot of that beating on myself, and that some players didn't like it. Some players just beats them down. Wasn't mad at them because I know how hard the game is. And yet it was my job to make sure every night we played the game right. And so I thought when I finally got to New York, I said, I'm going to have fun here. I'm going to enjoy it. This is probably going to be my last hurrah because I was getting up in years anyway. And I'm going to enjoy this, the biggest market, the biggest stage you could possibly be on. I've got good players, good people, have some fun with it. And I did. And I wish I could have had that attitude back when I got my first job in Houston, because we had pretty good teams there too. So I just think it takes time to grow. And again, I only managed the way I played, and that was max effort every night. And I think as a guy at my size and the kind of person I was, I had to grow and become a little different person to get through it. And so I look back on my career and I said, when I was younger, of course, I will tell you this, I wish we'd have known how important strength was. When I first signed, baseball players did not touch weights. We did not lift any weights. And so you were who you were. And and being small, I wish I'd have had a smart enough to know that I had to be stronger. That would have also helped. But I look back and, Andrew, I don't have to apologize for anything. I showed up. I played as hard as I could every day for 50 years. And you know what? I think about all the things that I gave up to stay in baseball. And for me, it was worth everything I ever did, because I had an absolute great career. I've met tremendous people on and off the field. And for me, I'm in a good place today.
Well, Terry, I'm so grateful that we've gotten to have this conversation. Earlier, you said that at one point, something that your dad would tell you is just make a difference every day. Yep. Make a difference every day. There's no question that you have done that, living the everybody pulls the tarp mindset, as I like to say. And although 2015 and your tenure didn't get me quite to that parade at the Canyon Heroes, you got us pretty darn close. And for that, I'm ever grateful. Some of my fondest memories as a baseball fan, as a Mets fan, and as I mentioned, a new dad at that point during 2015, it was very reminiscent of the stories that my parents told me about me in that crib when Mookie hit that ball through Buckner's legs and the Mets went on to win it all that year. I am so grateful that we've had a chance to have this conversation and that we've gotten to reflect on some of these incredible moments and experiences that you've had. Thank you for being a tarp puller, forever a part of the Everybody Pulls the Tarp family. And let's do this again soon. All right, Terry?
Sounds great, Andrew, and you're going to get your wish. You better make sure your parents are ready, because that parade's coming.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Until next time, keep pulling the tarp.